So, all right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the audience as well. Mato, you hopped in for Tim, who wrote recently, just a few minutes ago, that his son is ill and has to be taken to the doctor. But thanks for joining us as well. Thanks for joining us, Jim and Matthias, as well.
Pleasure.
I talked with Tim the other day about digital analytics. He told me about the new campus you're building in Dortmund, and then we talked about a few stories from the older years, how digital analytics was built and was in several companies. And there I got the idea, maybe this could be interesting. Also, not for Tim and me, but for other people as well. And that's why I asked you all if you would like to have a talk and discuss these old days or how digital analytics has evolved in the last years or maybe last decades, because all of you have been in the digital analytics industry since quite a few years. I would say at least 20 years. Mato, I'm not sure when did you start
It's about
with analytics?
15 years. So
15 years, okay.
Less than 20,
Nearly the 20 years.
Yeah, we hitting that anytime soon.
Okay, so we two, we are like the next generation, but Jim and Matthias, I think you are in this industry for at least 20 years, right? Both are nodding. 25 years, yeah. Okay, great. And this morning I talked in a sales call to a potential customer. He was a head of e-commerce at a bigger company here in Germany. And he told me, Florian, I'm lost with analytics. I have so many things to do. My head of analytics left a few months ago. I cannot find any replacement. We have to hire some agency for this. And he said to me, it got so technical in the last years, the whole analytics thing, it got so more complex, and it's very hard to find people for this job. Other story I remembered was 2 years ago, Jim, at your Marketing Analytics Summit in Berlin, I gave a workshop about GA4, how to implement it, some advanced techniques. There was a girl who told me she was responsible for, I think, 20 different websites for his company to take care of analytics and tracking and all this stuff. And I asked her, how do you do that? And she only said, well, I can just play the firefighter. And a few months later, she left that company. So what I want to say with these two stories is, I think there are several issues or challenges for companies to handle digital analytics these days. And maybe you three could tell more about how, in your eyes, these challenges have developed over years. So was it quite the same thing 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Yes.
Short answer, but perfect.
Let's start with things that have not changed. Things that have not changed include nobody in the company understands what I do for a living. They don't understand how hard it is. They don't understand the effort that goes into it, the fragility of the technology that has to get set up just so that the data flows properly. They don't understand the heavy lifting of actually analyzing the data and translating it into business recommendation. I'm not going to say insight, but influence. And they ask for more reports because they think that's what data is. These things have never changed. This has been true. In the meantime, the technology is getting much more sophisticated. And so it does take a village. And if the organization doesn't understand the value, they're not going to make the investment. This has never changed.
Agree. I was it last year on an evening kind of a meetup, 240 people. It was all about product analytics. I, who works in e-commerce now, thought about product analytics like the opposite way of customer analytics. It was different. product for them was a platform where people interact with, like an app. And most of these people were app developers and much younger than me, like in their 20s, mid-30s. And the problem they had, even though they deal with a different set of platforms, interactions, metrics as well. So page views is probably the last I look at, if that any exists. But the pattern was very, very similar how I experienced it, for instance, when I met Jim Sterne in 2007. They're still looking in ways to organize it meaningful, document stuff, not overtaking, not undertaking, data literacy, whatnot. And that are things which are still occurrent, and I think that will go on. But the level of automation and different tools in parallel and sophisticated methodologies, that's a different one.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Jim and Matthias. And getting a bit about what you told us, Florian, the two stories. So I think the complexity has definitely increased, but the pattern, as they both said, is still the same. And the most of the times the issues stem from a lack of communication, lack of understanding, not being transparent about what dependencies are or what apparently small changes can do to a tracking setup, which then translates to missing values or false values in dashboards, reports, and then ultimately also potentially false business or bad business decisions. So you always have to be kind of sensible. It is a fragile infrastructure, or it can potentially be, and you have to be very dedicated to talk to each other, to have this sort of interdisciplinary task force or group which comes together not just occasionally or whenever something goes live or a new feature is being introduced, but on a regular basis.
Yeah. I think you're right. When I talked to people what I do for my living several years ago, nobody could imagine what a digital analytics consultant is. When I'm talking now to people, surprisingly, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I know that. I know Google Analytics. And I just did a little research a few days ago on LinkedIn, how many people are working in analytics, especially in Germany and especially in the US. And it was way more than I thought. Let me just look at the numbers. According to LinkedIn, there are nearly 60,000 people for Germany that are in a certain kind of way working in digital analytics. In USA, what would you guess? How many people are there in the USA?
Millions.
Not that bad, quite 900,000. So nearly 1 million.
Let's talk about working in digital analytics.
Yeah.
A few years ago, you said, oh, I work with Google Analytics, and the response was, what's that? Today, oh, I know what that is, and oh, in fact, I'm responsible for it. I have no idea what it is. I don't know how to use it. I don't know how to implement it properly. All I do is look at the reports on the homepage. But for this company, I am the person responsible for Google Analytics. I work in digital analytics.
So you mean there are more people working on paper in this field, but
Yes.
the expertise isn't there, or there are no more people who have these expertise?
There are far more people who have been given the responsibility than have been properly trained.
It's like this old joke with recruiters looking for developers with a certain amount of years, like 5 years experience in that tool, which only exists for 2 years. And it feels a bit like that, especially talking about Google Analytics, because it basically has evolved into a kind of new tool. So Google Analytics 4 in itself brings a lot of new features, new aspects to it, and I think there can't be as many experts out there as you would see on paper. because essentially everyone is kind of getting used to it, adapting to it, learning all the new things, especially also with the background. That data studio isn't there anymore, but you're working with Looker right now. So it's a kind of new combination of tools, and everyone needs to get used to that.
It is a brand new tool and new tool set. And oh, here comes machine learning, and oh, here comes generative AI. And so it's just layers of complexity. And that means we have to go from, well, marketing literacy, some companies are still struggling with, to digital literacy. What is the World Wide Web really? Social media literacy, data literacy, then analytics literacy, and then generative AI literacy. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying to teach people what it is we do and why it's valuable. And it's time for us to completely shift gears and embrace the fact that dashboards are where data goes to die. And we're not going to build reports. People who say, just give me the data, I'll say, great, where did you get your analytics degree? Instead, I am going to be an advisor like a doctor. Instead of giving you all of the results of your blood panel analysis, I'm going to tell you what I think about your health. And we have to make that shift, or we're going to die under an overwhelming amount of technology and misunderstanding.
With the rise of AI tools, and I'm not discussing what is exactly AI and what is machine learning and what is a smart use of both, but AI in terms of, and I'm more talking about operative AI, not creational, or creative. But the biggest difference I see, which was clear to me, but it was nice to hear that the other day by someone, is instead of having the regular computing approach where you set something up and you wait for that to happen, and then next step is going. So there's the chain of executions. Now you more or less talk to the tool and say what the outcome you want to have. And that's a radical shift because, as we know, AI is just as good as its training data, which refers to Google Analytics as being sometimes a bit clumsy. But now you really need the data knowledge to make sure that whatever the AI does is actually smart and helpful and not a vicious circle or something. So again, same applies as ever. It's not the tools, it's really the understanding of how the tool does things and what you need for which purpose. And that's now really a radical shift because people still think in sets of executions. And that was trained all over the organization, depending on how long they're on. And that makes it hard to change. Like everybody is going into practice, everybody is talking about cookies and CDPs and stuff, but they're way, way more things than this very old method, which just has become faster.
Yeah, exactly. And now we make the jump into the future, even with AI, and instead of talking about the history. But a colleague of mine told me a few months ago, all these experts with the universal analytics knowledge don't have any job right now. They have to learn more GA4. But still, this is only the tooling. Like you said, it's more about the principles and methods. And for me, it would be interesting to know these principles and methods are not changing that fast, I would say, like the technique or the IT, like now with AI. Would you say there has been some evolution, some development in the last years in the companies, how they are handling analytics for them?
I just have a subjective view to it. Maybe there is no better and not more of a result. And I can't answer that because it's really different if you're a bank of 150-year history or if you're an AI startup which has been funded this February.
So it's a question about the legacy of the company, you mean?
Also, and their business case and how they interact with whatever is their customer or their product.
Yeah.
I really can't do these all over, right? It's a difference. And there are also good reasons still to do it in an old-fashioned way if that helps the business and the business to keep the control about what they're doing, right? It's not ignoring anything which is new, but only because something is new, it must not be better for whatever you're doing right now. As a software seller, it's sometimes hard because if a company says we're good enough, then the room for improvement is actually not that high prioritized.
Yeah, it's also a corporate culture question. Some
Also.
companies are extremely risk averse, and some people want to move fast and break things. And so that will have an impact.
Yeah. And one thing I think, what you asked for, what is a stable, and kind of the backbone is a good taxonomy, a good structure of data. And we are getting back, and I'm still often referring to it, like this W3C standard of a data layer. So back to an object-based data layer, a lot of companies going back to that to be really specific. And in what we've talked a bit earlier about, like using AI. You can also use AI for such boring tasks, like to write tracking documentation if you are specific and can articulate a prompt. You say that you want to do, or you want to have as an output, the data layer for your e-commerce shop, which is structured in this fashion, and you want to track a purchase. You get a data layer out of that immediately, and you can forward that to the developers to implement. And then you have kind of a tool agnostic foundation you can then leverage for whatever data applications you want to build on. But this is kind of one of the backbones. The other one being a documentation for that, and every developer is usually shaking their head, or everyone supposed to do the documentation is kind of finding it kind of like a burden, but it's still necessary to do. The good thing is you have those smart little helpers who can assist you greatly in that, and you don't have to write descriptions which have been written 1,000 times over before.
Okay, yeah. So Mato and also Matthias, you worked for also for Digital Motion in a strategic consulting approach. And Matthias, as I know, you also worked for an agency called Symphonic, right? That was an US-based agency, but you started the European location here.
I was the European office of Symphonic at that time, yeah. Until Symphonic was acquired by Ernst & Young, which changed its name to EY pretty much at the same time. And from there, I became independent. And with a few sidestep, also Digital Motion derived out of that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So from this strategic perspective, and Jim, you also got the strategic perspective for mainly US companies, right? But also for international companies. Would you say that there was a change in the last years in thinking of how critical is analytics for us, or how can we use it for us? So not only this operative technical approach.
Matthias, you want to go first?
Yeah, so there were quite a few differences. First by the countries, so US clients, I mean, I'm talking about something which happened 2012, 13, I think that was the time. So, I mean, been a while. So there was a big difference between, let's say, the average US and the average German or European company, even though average is really the worst measure of all. But there were way more in the peak than in the US and in Germany, so that could subjectively make think that they have heaps and heaps of super elaborated level 5 companies out there. There were just more in absolute numbers. But I think the relation between how many were on the top and how many were still a level 1, so to speak, was not that different. Not that different, right? And then it differs really by the business. Talking to a bank and insurance is a fully different thing than an e-commerce shop or even somebody who is doing some stuff with virtual goods or something. Right? This is a constant evolution. If I think back, I think, oh, that's interesting. And at the same time, I have both. I see sometimes the same problem occurring again and again and again. Right, as Mato outlined, and at the same time, usually the level of maturity is getting higher, which comes also with better and faster technologies.
And I'm seeing
more. Pardon me. Go ahead.
I'm seeing, well, so first of all, this question came up back in the early 1990s about websites. It's like the United States is way ahead of everybody, and then comes the UK, and then comes Germany, and Italy is somewhere down at the bottom. And it's just it by sheer numbers, yeah, okay, fine, by average. But in fact, it's some industries are ahead of others. Some companies are ahead of others, but then you get down to departments within companies, and there's one department doing one campaign that's really well tracked, and they write up a case study and they give a presentation at a conference, and everybody goes, oh, that whole company is doing so well. The whole country must be doing well. No, it's not true. That one project went really well, and so we all learned about it, and everybody else is struggling. The big change I see over time is the acceptance of data as a concept. That it used to be that we as digital analysts, web analysts, we had to explain where the data came from and why it was useful. And the only thing people could understand is, oh, you're doing accounting. So, no, it's statistics. Well, I don't know what that is, so don't bother me. I'm not good at math. It's like, well, it's not really math. It's coming up. Have you ever read Sherlock Holmes? It's just looking at the evidence and coming up with some inference. I mean, we do explain that. Now we don't. Now being data informed, data driven, data aware is a normality. If you are in marketing, you are looking at analytics, whether you understand it or not, whether you invest in it or not. It's being given lots of lip service. Everybody says, oh, yes, we have data. We are data driven. Yes, we are looking at Google Analytics every day, that homepage that we don't understand. But only the top 5% of projects are fully tagged, pipelines are built, the data flow, the data streams are combined, they find their way into a data lake, a data mart, I don't care what you call it, Snowflake, and then somebody on the data side who understands the business well enough can look at it and go, that's interesting. I better go ask the people in purchasing this question. I should ask the people in merchandising that question. And the people in advertising should be thinking about this. And that's what the interface should be, rather than data democratization, which just give everybody access to Google Analytics and they can look at the numbers themselves. No, they can't.
What should ever go wrong?
That's right. Yeah.
But when you see that, what you say also in the titles and probably in the department sizes. So it's not more uncommon since quite a while that people have something with analytics in their job title. There was before, it was kind of an awkward thing if somebody was an analyst. So a psychiatrist, maybe? What do you mean?
Yeah, business intelligence. You're a business analyst. No, I'm a marketing analyst.
Yeah.
So, Jim, you said this data as a concept. Does it mean that data gets its way in more to more people in the companies? Data plays a more impactful role for them?
Yes, senior management expects people to have data to back up their decisions.
So it's really that kind that companies are getting more data driven and they have to argument with this data.
That's
more.
That's what the PR would have you believe. Yes, that's we want everybody to believe, and I want, as a senior manager, as an executive, as a C-suite, yes, I want our company to be data driven. All of you people go out there and absorb data. It's like, yes, boss. But then there is no formal becoming data driven, data informed is a change management process that requires change management. It requires a project, a program to educate and test and evaluate and raise everybody's awareness, and then have specific requirements. I remember back in the days of Twitter, pre-X, they had a 1% rule. Anybody could run a test on 1% of the traffic without permission. They could just run a test. And if somebody came to a meeting and said, hey, I've got an idea, we should try this. The first question is, where are your experiment results? That's data informed. That is a data philosophy that very, very few companies get to enjoy.
Can there be run so many experiments at Twitter? I mean, it's like a very simple user interface.
Many things with micro experiments you never figure until it's gone because the experiment won.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's exactly this kind of mind shift you need to have in organizations to be less defensive about potentially making errors, because that's a learning opportunity, and also to be, or at least to prepare the structures and the processes to be flexible enough to then really also apply changes or optimizations you have identified. So what I've seen at the start of my career back in the agency days, so you would have situations where large companies already kind of pre-booked their ad budget for basically the entire year. And if you work with this kind of mindset, and even if it's just a month, if you kind of your advertisement booked already, then you will have a hard time of optimizing it, and have it be informed based on data. So identifying what channel, what placement worked better, and to shift things. So you have to be able to then also apply the results, the insights to the business.
This is the job that we have to learn how to do. This is the job that we're not being trained. We're learning how to use the tool. I mean, it's people, process, technology, and technology is the easiest part. Process is not so bad, but it requires people, which is really difficult. And the problem with people is I go to the doctor for my checkup. Okay, I don't want to see my blood panel results, but he says, eat less salt and less sugar, drink less alcohol, and exercise more. And I go, thanks, doc. And then I leave the room. And he has no control over what I do. And I could claim I have little control over what I do. But do I follow his instructions strictly? Not really. Am I part of a controlled experiment? No. I just go about living my life. So there's this disconnect between all of the data, the ideas that we have, and being able to influence the business. That's where the magic happens.
So it's more about this data literacy and how to tell the stories with data into the companies to make sure that there's an action or a reaction to this data. So not only to be capable that
I want to emphasize it's also about operationalizing the data. Because it's great if you tell your team about fancy insights and what not to do or not to do anymore, but that's too late. I mean, you do this on a certain meta level and on a strategic purpose and something, but you clearly want, I don't know, certain personalizations to happen in the microsecond it's needed, and it's depending on whatever factors you can't predict before. And that is, I mean, there are a bunch of systems which work with multiple data sets, but that needs to be put into operation towards the right users in the right moment, blah, blah, blah. And that is a whole big understanding where, I mean, I think I understand quite well the digital analytics type of thing, but if you put me into fintechs or ad layer tech layers, I'm getting lost. And from an outside, it's all the same, right? But it's not. I can tell you from the inside. So there are so many different verticals, so to speak, where you deal with different types of data, and you really need to understand what it does for avoiding to hit the wall at 200k an hour speed with a fancy interface in front of you.
And then on the business side, the difficulty is we're talking about marketing. So I can measure sales, I can measure accounting, income and expenses, I can calculate profit. but we're talking about measuring human behavior, and we don't know how to do that. Is that like a session in your website? What does it mean? Are people, what is intent based on search terms? Which it's psychology. We don't know. So trying to explain this stuff in numbers is a challenge in itself.
And that's a good thing, because talking about how analytics has evolved, so we've seen like new titles coming up, or things sounding really elaborate, like a data scientist. Then everyone saw, okay, but we don't only need scientists, we need also the engineers to build our sensors, and then we have engineers, and eventually there might be a new role like data interpreter, or even data marketer, someone who's able to tell the story, or maybe it's also data storyteller. So whatever there will be, you likely will need a different skill set than the other persons to really make use of the data. So
I was working with yeah. Go ahead.
You're just making the point that I kind of see it a lot of times in organizations, that they expect that the one data expert is kind of a know-it-all. So it's the one person who can implement stuff technically, who can then do more sophisticated statistical analysis, and then he has also to do the storytelling portion.
I was working with a large client in London, and they decided, and the statement was, we understand that it takes a village. Like, these are different. The collecting the data is different than building a pipeline, is different from building a model, is different from interpretation, is different from, and they created a position called data storyteller. And the analyst, instead of going to the stakeholders, would go to the data storyteller and say, here's what I did, here's what I found, here's what I think the recommendation is. And then the data storyteller would give the presentation. So it's like we've got the script writer and the director and the actor to present to the audience, because these are different skills. And in many companies, most companies, we expect, well, Matthias will remember back when we were doing, websites first started, there was the webmaster responsible for everything.
That was my first job actually in that business. I became, from there, I actually focused more on the measurement than on the coding. Well, actually on the coding too. But exactly, that was for many people the route into analytics.
So it does take a village, Mato. You're exactly right.
See in many companies this more common role, Mato, that you mentioned too. This one knows everything about data, one knows and does everything about analytics and also Google Ads, for example. And when you see how many people are required for online marketing and analytics and how many people are there, it's getting difficult, I think, to have those special persons like a data storyteller, because it's not something that you can learn in a few months, years, for example. You have to be very experienced. Also, like this data scientists, data engineers, it has to take a village. You have to find all those people for this village, and you have to pay them. It's very difficult for most companies, I guess.
Last month, I was in front of an audience of 350 advertising agency owners to talk about data. And I said, how many of you are responsible for the analytics in your company? And only about 20% raised their hands, because these were the owners. How many of you have somebody who is the analyst for all of your clients? And about half the hands went up. It's like they have one person who's doing analytics for 25 clients. I said, best recommendation, outsource. Find a boutique analytics agency to do this work for you. Just like you don't do your own event planning. You don't do your own brochure printing. You shouldn't be doing your own analytics. And they all looked relieved, because Now there's a solution.
So there's a village that people can share or companies can share. They don't have to have their own village all the time.
Right. And it's too expensive to have your own village.
Yeah. Mato, I think you are at Digital Motion currently building an analytics or digital analytics campus, right?
Yeah. So basically, we had already that village, that outsourced village, which can help. But also we believe that data literacy will be a part or an even more increasingly important part in the job profiles of everyone else and everyone in online marketing, essentially, and to at least provide a basic understanding, like the first degree you would get. We want to introduce this campus. The campus is looking into 5 different roles. The more common ones, like the digital analytics engineer, the technical part, so to say, then an analyst, the one doing reporting, dashboarding, making sense out of numbers, or applying more sophisticated statistical methods, and then also 3 other profiles which are more concerned about the strategic part, for instance. So looking into how does the data support my business case? What are things we also need to include in our business vision? So how can data inform or shape our business even? Then the other role is more looking into capability, meaning how do you build an organization? So organizational structures, learning how to change the jobs within your company, so that also new hires for a different part, like for example, MarTech people are then required to provide at least a certain level of analytics knowledge as well, because what we see currently is a lot of times it gets the other way around. So there's an analyst and someone from the business side knows, but yeah, you're already working with Google Ads. Can you implement that? And can you also take a look into our ad campaigns and their performance, which might not be ideal. So we believe that it makes sense that someone with a strong marketing background, understanding of how to plan and how to implement campaigns, gets at least a basic knowledge on how the data is collected. So it's not necessary to be then to the go-to person, but at least to have that level of literacy to be able to speak to the experts collecting the data. And then lastly, there's a third or another profile for people who are concerned around data analytics processes. So all the stuff around documentation, but also data privacy, enablement of teams. So what are your build requirements when formulating, for instance, a request for a new tracking feature or for an analysis? So what information has to be provided from the business side to be able to properly deliver on that? So those are essentially the 5 core competencies, and the goal is to have corporations and individual people apply to that to strengthen their capabilities in those areas.
Is it too simplistic to say that you are addressing data strategy?
No, not. I wouldn't say that. So it's not too simplistic. So data strategy is definitely a part of that as well, and we try to have a holistic view on it. To say that we know we kind of think of it like from gaming perspectives, where you have different character classes, and so to be able to be successful in some of the games, you have to work together. So you need a healer, you need a tank, you need someone who does the damage. And thinking of analytics in that sense, you will see that for all the analytics parts, you have to have the different roles, not necessarily always in their full version or their end level, so to say, but they should at least have a common ground, an overlap in some sense, where they can work together as a team.
I think this is a good approach, this gamification approach, how to level up, how to build this village we talked about, which roads are in this village, and that you don't have to have every person in this village for your own company.
Yeah, it stems a bit from looking into what are typical problems. And Jim and Matthias have also already talked about it used to be maybe a challenge in technology couple of years back, or some still believe it and they throw more technology on the problem to solve it. But then you have the people component and the process component, and you, for starters, should find out where you stand. So what your current capabilities are as an organization or as a person, and then look also into what's needed to do my job properly, or what's needed to get where I want to be. And then you have to strengthen a bit the skills in the other areas as well. So it doesn't help you to just focus on technology. It doesn't help you just to focus on processes. You always have to find a sweet spot and a good mix out of those aspects.
I think this campus is starting in a few weeks or months, so there are now or haven't been any people get taught. But could you say if there are there's solo persons from companies, or are there whole teams from companies?
There can also be teams. So it's a very modular setup. So we are going to introduce individual courses dedicated to improve the level of one particular skill in 1 hour formats, and then you would typically apply for like a week-long or 2-week-long boot camp. So it's kind of a mix, and then you can also decide, I just want the data strategy part, because that's where I'm mainly lacking. Or you can say, okay, I need kind of a mix of data strategy and data engineering to progress, and then you would have a split of those sessions. And you could definitely join there as a team as well, but also as individuals. It will be actual classrooms, like physical classrooms. Location is going to be Dortmund, or not to spoil it too much, but there will be a physical location, and then it's eventually going to get rolled out in more cities as well.
Mm-hmm. Matthias and Jim, we didn't talk about the Digital Analytics Association yet, but you two built like this whole community thing. Matthias, you especially here in Germany. Would you say that this kind of approach, like this analytics campus, is for at least the educational element of the association, is the next step, or another approach?
Because it's a different thing. And I totally applause to the approach Mato just described, because that's certainly needed in many ways, and it needs to evolve in a very, very fast pace to keep up with the current challenges. The DAA had a different scope. Of course, education was a big stake in it, but at a larger level, and usually not with boot camps, even though those existed at some extent. So I can't remember a 2-week boot camp, but at least I did a few 2-day long for the, I don't know how it was called, but basically the Web Analytics 101 at that time, where people really needed to understand what kind of metrics do I have, where can they be useful or not, and really the 101. The DAA, I mean, you have to ask Jim about the beginning of the DAA. I was just involved in the subsidiary Germany, and most of the analytics we did was actually analyzing legal frameworks, how to make it happen, because it was not easy to have something like an eingetragener Verein in German combined with this association, which when they were funded, had not a franchising system, so to speak, in mind. So the constitution and the legal framework were complicated. The goal was very simple. It was having kind of a professional network where everybody in the business, which is centralized, decentralized, with a lot of local events like evenings, so also little conferences or longer conferences and so on, to enable people to talk to each other. And that worked because of the big enthusiasm and passion we saw in that business, especially in the older days when there was no proper education for that. So my first job was a nurse. When I worked at Symphony, I was with a former Egyptologian or a muffle scientist, an old hippie, a parachute jumper. I mean, I didn't make it up. All these characters were there, and that was just, I don't know, 6 or 8 or 30 or 40. So everybody who came there, as a joke, we could say at some point they stumbled over Excel and ended up in analytics by whatever they were doing, or digital analytics. So, but that was really an interesting and very fruitful exchange. And from there, there's also still a very fruitful exchange if you talk to digital analysts who are doing their stuff in a different business, or sometimes with the same business but with a different approach. So that's what actually really put things into mind, which let ideas evolve, which let the project work, and which actually creates passion out of passion. So that was the whole purpose, I would say.
I think the word passion, actually, first, I recognized all of those other characters. Who was the parachute jumper?
A French, formerly French guy working at Symphony. I have to look up the name. He was a superb guy, but he was a French parachute jumper in his first slide.
When the DAA started as the Web Analytics Association, it was because there was nothing. And it was, I mean, I put on the Marketing Analytics Summit, then called eMetrics Summit, back in 2002. Instant community. We'd never met each other before. We were excited to meet each other. And it was a trade show and consulting people and practitioners all saying, oh, we understand what you're talking about, and nobody else in my company does. So it was very exciting. Then we had to build an education, professional development program. So here's Web Analytics 101. Here's meetups. Here are opportunities to get together. And it was very exciting because it was the beginning of a new industry. Just like back in the 1990s, oh, it's the internet, it's the web. Let's get together and talk about web stuff. Like today, it's very exciting to get together in meetups and talk about generative AI. It's new. We don't know what we're doing. Let's invent it. Then we climb up the maturity curve to where digital analytics is an accepted thing. It's normal. And those of us who started the association back 20 years ago have matured personally as the industry has matured, and the younger group that will come in to say, okay, now we'll be the volunteers and we'll build the programs. It's like, no, this is boring. It just exists. It's not new and exciting. What we need is practical education. So what Mato is doing is the natural progression. It's moving up the maturity curve of, hey, everybody, let's get together and talk about this and have some drinks, to, okay, now we have formal education. And I need to add certification to what I'm doing. And I need to go someplace that has the imprimatur to be able to say, yes, you have studied, yes, you passed the test. So I think it's an absolutely natural progression.
And speaking of kind of this life cycle of trends, so I think also with analytics, we have seen this valley of disappointment after the initial hype, so where everyone just thought, okay, if I buy like a tool or an analytics suite for a six-figure number license per year, all my problems will get solved 2 or 3 years later. And they are still asking similar questions and haven't found the answers yet because they didn't do it with the people. Didn't have the experience, didn't have also the culture to really get to the gist of it. Then the disappointment came, and now they potentially even stopped for a while. And again, they are seeing or increasingly seeing a necessity. So they are getting back there with less enthusiasm, but maybe with a more objective view of what they can expect and how fast they can get to answers, what efforts they have to do or undergo to get to the answers.
What we saw in the United States in 2000 to 2010 is people getting web trends and being very excited, and it's not working. We're not getting what we want. Okay, throw that out. Let's get Website Story. Okay, we implement it. We spend a year putting it together, and it's like, it's not giving us what we want. Well, let's get Omniture, and it's not maybe it's us.
Yeah.
They
finally realized they needed the education.
It's the same what you said, Matthias, about you don't need the tool, or a fool with a tool is still a fool. No, it's about the people. Maybe that's the thing we will see with AI as well, because I'm not sure. I think I have 4 subscriptions now for AI tools at the moment. I could have even more, but I'm refusing to it and have to use ChatGPT even more before I get the next tool. Jim, when you said 20 years ago, if I got it right, DAA or WAA the day was founded in 2004, right?
Yeah.
And just for 20 years is so we cannot imagine how long it is, but YouTube was founded in 2005, so it was even 1 year till YouTube and 2 years till Google bought YouTube. So amazing how old digital analytics is as an industry. We only think about it, it's quite new, but 20 years in internet years is many years.
Nobody knows us anymore. Basically.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting thing.
No, but you're right. But in the same way, if you look back, it's like looking back at the old phones. I mean, that's always a running gag. But somebody who has not lived in that time, he thinks like we're talking about dinosaurs or, I don't know, really old techniques, right? But that was it. And it was top notch at its time.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's a good wrap and some good last words for this topic. Thank you very much. I would say I'm pressing at stop. Thank you for the to the audience. So let's stop.